He was the most celebrated scholar in the Islamic world. He had students, wealth, and a prestigious teaching post in Baghdad. Then one day, he stopped speaking mid-lecture, not because he forgot his words, but because he realized, standing before 400 students, that he had spent his life teaching religion and had never once lived it. He was 38 years old. He walked away from everything. He gave his money to the poor, left his family in someone else's care, and disappeared into 11 years of wandering prayer and silence. When he returned, he wrote the book that would change Islamic civilization. This is a summary of Ihya Ulum-id-Din, Revival of Religious Sciences, by Imam Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, born 1058 in Persia, died 1111. It is 4 volumes, 40 chapters, and 1,000 years old. Scholars have said that if every book of Islam were lost, the faith itself could be reconstructed from this one text alone. If a summary like this is useful to you, subscribing takes 1 tap. Ghazali was not writing for scholars. He was writing for the person who performs every ritual correctly, but feels nothing, who knows all the rules but cannot find God. The crisis at the center of the Ihya is not intellectual, it is personal. You can memorize every verse of the Quran and still be spiritually dead. You can fast every year and still be enslaved to your ego. What does it actually mean to live a religious life? Not on paper, but in the bones. The Ihya answers that question across 4 great movements. The first is worship and what it is actually for. The second is how we conduct ourselves in ordinary daily life. The third is the inner enemies, the forces inside us that silently destroy what we are trying to build. The fourth is the virtues that rebuild the soul: repentance, patience, love, and the final reckoning with death. Each of these movements is not a category, it is a stage. The purpose of ritual, what prayer is actually doing. Most people pray the way they pay a bill. You do it because it is required, and once it is done, you stop thinking about it. Ghazali says this kind of worship is almost worthless. Worse, it is a kind of lie. You are performing the form of submission while your heart is somewhere else entirely. He gives a specific example. A man performs his ablution, the ritual washing before prayer, and his hands move through the motions while his mind calculates the price of grain in the next village. He has purified his body. His soul is untouched. This, says Ghazali, is the central disease of his age, and it is the central disease of ours. The Ihya teaches that every act of worship has an outward form and an inward secret. The form of prayer is the posture, the words, the direction of the body toward Mecca. The secret of prayer is the total turning of attention toward God, so that for a few minutes, the noise of the self goes quiet. Zakat, the giving of alms, is not merely a tax on the wealthy. Its secret is the death of attachment to money, the deliberate practice of loosening the grip that possessions have on the heart. Fasting is not hunger. Its secret is learning that the body's desires can be governed, that you are not entirely at the mercy of what you want. The practical consequence of this is simple, though not easy. Before each act of worship, Ghazali instructs the believer to set an intention, not a vague one, but a specific one. I am doing this in order to come closer to God. I am doing this to weaken the hold that greed has on me. Without that intention, the outer act and the inner life remain strangers to each other. You know the feeling of going through a day without once being present in it. That is the life Ghazali is warning against, and the life the Ihya is trying to wake you from. How to live in the world without being consumed by it. The second book of the Ihya covers something most religious texts avoid: ordinary life, trade, marriage, eating, friendship. Ghazali understood that most people are not monks. They have bills and families and appetites. So he asks the harder question: how does a person pursue God while also buying grain and raising children and arguing with neighbors? His answer is that every ordinary act carries within it a religious dimension, but only if the person carries it there deliberately. Take his rules on eating. He says food should be lawful, earned honestly. It should be eaten with conscious gratitude. The Prophet, he notes, never criticized a meal that was offered to him. If he liked it, he ate. If he did not, he simply left it. No complaint, no drama. This is not a rule about food. It is a practice of contentment, repeated 3 times a day. On marriage, Ghazali is bracingly honest. He lists the harms and the benefits with equal seriousness. Marriage provides companionship, protects against temptation, and creates a space where patience and generosity can be practiced every day. But marriage also multiplies anxiety, ties the heart to worldly concerns, and can distract a person from God as easily as it can draw him closer. He does not pretend the institution is simple. His chapters on friendship may be the most quietly radical part of the second book. He writes that a true friend is someone who tells you your faults, who stops you from wrongdoing even when it is inconvenient, who does not flatter. The measure of a real friendship, he says, is not how it feels on a good day. It is what the friend does when you are about to make a serious mistake. There is a line buried in this section that carries the weight of the whole volume. He writes that enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong is not just a social duty. It is a form of love. To stay silent when someone you care about is heading toward harm, out of politeness or fear of their reaction, is a kind of abandonment dressed up as kindness. The question that should follow you out of this section: who in your life tells you the truth? The hidden enemies, what is actually destroying you. The third book is the most uncomfortable. Ghazali calls it the book of destructive evils. It is an anatomy of the inner life, a careful, unflinching examination of the forces that corrupt the soul from the inside. He names them one by one: greed, the harms of the tongue, anger, envy, love of wealth, pride, the desire for status. What makes Ghazali's treatment different from a sermon is that he never just condemns these forces. He explains them. He traces them to their roots in the structure of the soul itself. He begins with the soul, nafs in Arabic, and describes it as a kingdom with competing armies. Intellect is the minister. Passion and desire are the revenue collector, always working, always gathering, always wanting more. Anger is the police force, useful when rightly directed, catastrophic when it takes over. The soul's work is to keep these forces in their proper order, with intellect governing and passion serving. When that order reverses, when the appetite commands and the mind justifies, the person has become, in Ghazali's words, not fully human. The chapter on the tongue alone could fill a book. He catalogues its weapons: lying, backbiting, flattery, speaking too much, speaking carelessly, saying things in jest that land as wounds. His practical instruction is radical in its simplicity. He writes that a wise man treats each breath as a priceless jewel that cannot be recovered once spent. Every sentence that serves no good purpose is a jewel thrown into the sea. Pride receives his sharpest attention. He describes it as the most insidious evil because it disguises itself as virtue. A man becomes proud of his learning, and his learning begins to separate him from God rather than lead him closer. A woman becomes proud of her piety, and her piety becomes a performance for others. Pride does not announce itself. It arrives dressed as confidence, as standards, as righteous indignation. He offers one diagnostic question. How do you feel when someone corrects you? If correction stings, if the correction feels like an attack, pride has taken root. The healthy soul receives correction as a gift. The proud soul receives it as an insult. He was 38 when he realized this about himself. He had been speaking about pride from a lectern for years, and the lectern was the problem. The work of rebuilding, repentance, patience, and trust in God. The fourth book is where Ghazali turns from diagnosis to medicine. Its subject is the constructive virtues, the practices that rebuild what the destructive evils have torn down. He begins with tawbah, repentance, and he is precise about what it means. It is not guilt. It is not regret alone. Tawbah has three elements: knowing that what you did was harmful, feeling genuine sorrow for it, and committing not to do it again. If any one of these three is missing, the repentance is incomplete. He is careful to say that God's readiness to receive repentance is not diminished by the size of the sin. He tells the story of a man who lost his camel in the desert with all his food and water. He lay down to die. Then he opened his eyes and found the camel standing before him. The prophet says God's joy at receiving a repentant believer exceeds even that man's joy, and that man was beside himself with relief. Patience comes next. He distinguishes between three kinds: patience in obeying God, patience in refraining from what is forbidden, and patience in bearing calamity. The third is the one most people think of when they hear the word, but he says the first two are actually harder. It is more difficult to sustain consistent obedience over a lifetime than to endure a single disaster with grace. He treats tawakkul, trust in God, reliance on God, with particular care. He is firm that tawakkul does not mean passivity. It does not mean sitting still and expecting God to act. He writes that a farmer plants his seed. He does everything within his power. Then he trusts. This is tawakkul. To refuse to plant because you are trusting God is not faith. It is laziness wearing faith's clothing. The chapter on love is the high point of the fourth book, and possibly the whole Ihya. Ghazali argues that love of God is not a metaphor or a feeling to be earned. It is the natural end state of a soul that has come to understand what God actually is. He lists 5 causes of love. We love what sustains our life, what benefits us, what does good for others, what is beautiful, and what has a secret kinship with our own soul. Then he shows, carefully, that every one of these 5 causes belongs to God alone, more completely than to any other being. A benefactor who gives you something is not the real source of the gift. God created the benefactor, his wealth, his impulse to give, and the moment of receiving. To love the human without tracing the love back to its origin is like loving shade while ignoring the tree. One of the sages he quotes says, "Love of God, even to the weight of a mustard seed, is worth more than 70 years of worship performed without love." That is not an encouragement to feel more. It is an instruction to understand more deeply what you are actually doing when you turn toward prayer. The one thing no one wants to think about. The Ihya closes where all lives close, with death, and Ghazali is not gentle about it. He writes that most people are not afraid of death. They are avoiding it so completely that they have stopped seeing it altogether. They live as if they will not die. And this avoidance, he says, is the root of most of their moral failures. The person who truly remembers death does not spend time on trivial cruelties, does not hold petty grudges, does not squander the hours of a day that will not return. He recommends a specific practice. Sit quietly. Think of a person you knew who has died. Recall their face. Then recall their burial. Then ask yourself, what have I done with the time I was given that they were not? Not to produce guilt, but to produce clarity. The Prophet, he records, said, "Remember death often, for it obliterates sins and makes you God-fearing." And a man asked the Prophet, "Who among all people is most wise and most honored?" He said, "Those who remember death the most and prepare most for it." The final pages of the Ihya turn toward what Ghazali calls the vision of God, the ultimate end of the soul's long journey. He describes it as something that cannot be fully put into words, only pointed at. It is the state in which the soul finally sees what it was always moving toward. Every act of worship, every suppressed cruelty, every hour of patience was pointing here. He walked away from his lectern in Baghdad at 38. He returned 11 years later and wrote all of this down, not as theory, as testimony of a man who had everything the world counts as success, lost it deliberately, and found something the world has no name for. The question he leaves you with is the one he spent his life answering. You know what the right life looks like. You have probably known for a long time. What is standing between knowing and living it? If something in this summary stayed with you tonight, drop it in the comments below.